My husband excluded me from his sister's engagement dinner. A week later, he regretted it. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Emily, I'm 32 and I've been married to my husband, David, for 6 years. We've had our ups and downs like any couple, but I always believed we were on the same team. From the very beginning, I threw myself into his family's world. I hosted Thanksgivings when his mom wasn't feeling up to it. I drove his dad to doctor's appointments. I even stayed up nights helping his younger sister Rachel polish her resume when she was struggling to land her first real job. I never complained, I just wanted to be accepted as part of their family. But no matter what I did, Rachel never warmed up to me. She was 4 years younger, full of attitude, and seemed to see me as some kind of intruder in her perfect little bubble with her brother. I brushed it off for years, telling myself time would change things. David always told me not to take it personally, that Rachel just had a strong personality. When Rachel announced her engagement, I thought maybe this would be the turning point. A wedding meant big family moments, and I assumed I'd be right there beside my husband, celebrating with everyone. After all, I was his wife, not just some acquaintance. I started thinking about what dress I might wear, how I could help with planning, and whether they'd want me to host a shower. The engagement dinner was coming up, and I imagined us going together, holding hands, maybe even sharing a toast with his family. It felt like one of those milestones where, despite the rocky start, Rachel might finally see me as someone who wasn't going away, someone who cared. I'd supported her silently for years, even when she barely acknowledged me. In my mind, showing up for her dinner was the least she could accept from me. I had no reason to doubt it. Why would I? I was married into this family, bound to them by love and commitment. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have imagined, was that the very event I thought would draw us closer was about to become the deepest cut of betrayal. I was folding laundry when my phone buzzed. A friend of mine who happened to know Rachel through work sent me a casual message. "Hey, sorry you couldn't make it to the dinner. David said you weren't going." I froze. The dinner wasn't for another night, and I hadn't heard a single word from David about not going. My hands started to shake as I typed back, trying to play it cool, but my stomach twisted. If he'd already told people I wasn't coming, that meant he'd decided for me. When he walked through the door later that evening, I didn't even wait for him to put his keys down. "Why are people saying I'm not invited to your sister's dinner?" He looked annoyed, like I'd asked about something trivial. "'Cause you're not. It's just family, Emily. Don't overthink it." I stared at him. "I am family. I'm your wife." He sighed as if I was the one being unreasonable. "Rachel doesn't want you there. She thinks it'll be less stressful without you, so let's just avoid drama." The words cut like glass. Less stressful without me? I had been bending over backwards for that family for years. And now he was agreeing I didn't belong? My face burned with humiliation. "Do you hear what you're saying to me?" My voice cracked despite me trying to keep it steady. He shrugged, avoiding my eyes. "Don't make a big deal out of it. It's one night. Why do you have to turn everything into a fight?" I wanted to scream, to shake him until he understood how deeply he was wounding me. But instead, I just stood there in stunned silence, realizing in that moment how little weight I carried in his world. He didn't defend me. He didn't even hesitate. He chose his sister's comfort over my dignity without blinking. The room felt cold, even though the heater was humming. My chest felt heavy, but my throat was too tight for words. Finally, I whispered, "I can't believe you did this to me," and he just muttered, "It's nothing, Emily. Drop it." That was the moment the betrayal settled in my bones. Not just Rachel's rejection, but David's decision to stand with her against me. The night of the dinner came, and I found myself sitting alone in a quiet house. The clock ticked louder than usual, every minute stretching out as I stared at the untouched meal I had made for myself. I kept imagining the clinking glasses, the laughter, the warmth of the restaurant where everyone else was gathered. I tried reading, tried turning on the TV, but nothing distracted me from the emptiness of being shut out. Hours passed before I finally heard the front door slam open. David stumbled inside, his tie loose, his cheeks flushed from alcohol. He smelled like whiskey and expensive food. "It was perfect," he slurred, kicking off his shoes carelessly. Everyone was there. The food, the speeches, even the band, couldn't have been better. He collapsed onto the couch, grinning at his own retelling. I waited, hoping he might notice the ache on my face or even just acknowledge me sitting there. Instead he went on about Rachel's ring, about how the dessert was out of this world, about how happy everyone looked. Not once did he look at me and say, "I wish you'd been there." When he finally stood up to head toward the bedroom, I glanced at his hands, his pockets. Any sign he'd thought of me at all? A slice of cake, a single flower, something small. There was nothing. He had returned with stories for himself and nothing for the woman who had been erased from the evening. I didn't say a word. I just watched him strip off his jacket and laugh to himself about some inside joke they'd shared at the table. Every laugh landed like a blow. In the silence that followed, something inside me hardened. For the first time since we'd married, I didn't see us as partners. I saw a man who celebrated with others while leaving me in the shadows. The bed felt foreign when I finally lay down beside him. His drunken snores filled the room, but all I heard was the echo of my own emptiness. That was the night I realized the bond one thought we shared had cracked beyond repair. The days after the dinner dragged like a weight across my chest. I went through the motions of daily life, making coffee, answering emails, folding sheets. But I did it all with a numbness that made everything feel far away. David would talk about ordinary things, work, errands, bills, and I would nod without really hearing him. My replies grew shorter, my voice quieter. A wall had started to rise inside me and I didn't bother tearing it down. When I was alone, my mind replayed years of memories I had pushed aside. I saw myself standing in our kitchen at Thanksgiving, sleeves rolled up, cooking for his entire family while he sat in the living room watching football. I remembered Rachel calling me late at night in tears because she had a big interview the next morning, and me staying awake until dawn rehearsing answers with her. I thought of the envelope of cash I handed David's parents when they hit a rough patch, money I had saved for something personal but gave without hesitation. All of those moments had been invisible, forgotten the instant they no longer served anyone else. And now with one decision I had been shown my true place. Optional. Disposable. I started to see the engagement dinner not as a single night, but as a symbol of everything that had gone wrong. It wasn't just about missing a meal or being uninvited. It was proof that David had never put me first, not once in all the years we'd shared a home and a life. His loyalty had always bent toward them, no matter the cost to me. I stopped waiting for him to notice my silence. Instead, I let the quiet become my ally. I cooked for myself and left him to fend for his own dinner. I spent evenings out of the house instead of sitting in front of the television with him. And while he chalked it up to me being moody, I was sketching the outlines of something he couldn't yet see. I didn't announce my intentions. I didn't argue or plead. But deep down a plan was taking shape. If I was never going to be chosen, then I would start choosing for myself. One evening, when the weight of unspoken words pressed too hard on my chest, I asked David to sit with me at the table. He looked surprised, maybe even a little wary, but he pulled out a chair. My hands trembled against the wood grain as I finally let the question escape. "Why am I never enough for you?" For a moment he blinked at me like I had spoken a foreign language. Then he let out a small laugh, dismissive and sharp. "You're overreacting again, Emily. You always do this." I held his gaze, refusing to let him brush past it. But he leaned back, arms crossed, and added, "Rachel just has her preferences. She's particular, you know that. It's nothing personal." Nothing personal. The phrase landed like a knife. Every sacrifice I'd made, every moment I'd given, reduced to a quirk of his sister's tastes. As though I were some dish she didn't feel like ordering from a menu. My throat tightened. "You don't see how humiliating this is for me, do you?" He sighed heavily, rubbing his forehead. "Look, she's my sister. I want her happy, okay? Why can't you just let it go for once?" The room seemed to tilt, his words echoing louder than the hum of the refrigerator in the corner. His sister's comfort outweighed my pain. His choice was so clear, so easy, that it didn't even occur to him there might be another way. In that instant something inside me gave way. It wasn't anger that surged, but clarity. I realized I had been holding up the entire marriage with my own hands, while he stood off to the side, watching. I was alone in a union that was supposed to be built on two. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I simply sat there, staring at the man who had just confirmed with casual words that my worth would always come second. A hollow calm spread through me as I saw him not as my partner, but as someone who had already chosen his side long before I asked the question. That was the moment I understood. Our marriage wasn't broken by accident. It had been one-sided all along. I made a decision that night, though I never spoke it aloud. There would be no shouting matches, no begging him to see me, no pleading for scraps of respect. If words could not move him, then actions would. Quiet, deliberate actions. The next morning I rose early as always, but instead of preparing his breakfast, I poured myself a single cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table with my laptop. The frying pan stayed cold on the stove. When his voice called out, confused, I simply said, "There's cereal." And I didn't look up. It became a pattern. His shirts piled in the hamper untouched. His dinner plate sat empty at night while mine carried something simple I had cooked for myself. I withdrew the small comforts he had grown used to. The smile greeting him at the door, the hand brushing his shoulder as I passed, the subtle reminders that I was there holding us together. At the same time I began reclaiming parts of myself I had left behind. I reopened an old bank account in my name, slowly moving bits of money where his eyes wouldn't notice. Lunches with friends returned to my calendar. I sent a message to a former colleague just to reconnect, and found myself surprised at how natural it felt to talk to someone who remembered me outside the label of David's wife. With each step I felt a new steadiness take root inside me. He thought I was sulking, waiting for him to apologize. He had no idea I was building a safety net beneath my own feet. When he asked why the house felt different, why I seemed distant, I offered nothing but vague answers. I let him believe it would blow over the way he thought all things did. But I knew better. This wasn't a mood. This was a response. The betrayal had carved a line too deep to ignore, and I would not let it go unmarked. He had chosen to show me where I stood. Now it was my turn to show him what that choice truly meant. A week later he mentioned it in passing, almost like he was telling me the weather forecast. "Rachel's doing a little brunch just for close family. You weren't expected anyway." He said it without hesitation, as though the words carried no sting. I didn't argue. I simply nodded and carried on, though inside I felt a strange calm settle over me. This time I wouldn't sit at home waiting for the hours to crawl by. I made my own plans. That Sunday, while he dressed and headed out the door, I slipped into a sundress and met two girlfriends for a late breakfast downtown. We laughed over stacks of pancakes, lingered over mimosas, and let the conversation wander from work to travel to silly memories that had nothing to do with David or his family. For the first time in a long while I felt light, like myself again. Afterward we walked through the park, sun spilling through the trees. Someone cracked a joke that made me laugh so hard my sides hurt, and I realized how long it had been since I'd laughed without restraint. By the time I got home, my cheeks were still flushed from the day, my hair windblown, a trace of joy clinging to me like perfume. When David returned that evening, I was curled comfortably on the couch with a book, still humming with the energy of the day. He stepped inside, expecting, perhaps, to see me sulking the way he always imagined I would when excluded. Instead, his eyes lingered on me, confused by the brightness he hadn't put there. "Good day?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "Great," I answered, closing the book with a smile. I didn't elaborate. I didn't offer him details. The silence between us was deliberate, and I let it stretch. He shifted uneasily, loosening his collar as if the air had grown heavy. For the first time he seemed uncertain. He had gone to his sister's gathering, confident I'd be at home, waiting, diminished. Instead he walked into a house where I carried myself differently, glowing from a day that had nothing to do with him. And in that moment I saw it in his eyes. The first flicker of unease, the first shadow of regret. It didn't take long before he began to sense the shift. The little things he had always taken for granted were simply gone. No plate waiting on the table when he walked through the door. No folded stack of shirts placed neatly on the dresser. No soft hand brushing against his arm when he looked tired. The house felt different. Quieter, colder, stripped of the invisible touches that had always made it a home. At first he brushed it off. He ordered takeout, tossed his clothes into the hamper, convinced it was a temporary mood I'd eventually snap out of. But as the days stretched on, he started to notice the weight of my absence, even while I was still under the same roof. He tried his old tricks, playful remarks, leaning in for a kiss, asking if I wanted to go out for dinner. I answered kindly, but there was no warmth behind it. My tone was polite, my smile practiced, but the connection he expected wasn't there. It was as if I were treating him like a guest, not a partner. The more he reached, the further away I felt. He noticed that when he spoke about his day, I didn't lean in to listen. When he laughed at his own stories, I no longer joined him. The silence unsettled him more than any argument ever had. For the first time he seemed to realize how much of his comfort had come from me. Not from his sister, not from anyone else. Rachel could host a brunch, she could play the center of attention, but she wasn't here at night when the sink filled with dishes, when the house felt lonely, when his world needed steady hands. I caught him watching me one evening as I read on the couch, his expression tight, uncertain. He didn't say it aloud, but I could see the thought flickering across his face. The regret of choosing someone else's comfort over mine. The truth was beginning to settle in for him. He was living in the space I had once filled, and without my care, it felt starkly empty. And for the first time he was the one left on the outside. Weeks later, another family gathering rolled around, this time at his parents' house. David mentioned it offhand, perhaps expecting me to decline the way I had before. Instead, I chose to go. I dressed simply but elegantly, walked in with a calm smile, and greeted everyone as though nothing had ever happened. Through dinner I kept my tone light, my laughter measured. I chatted with his mother about recipes, asked his father about his garden, even complimented Rachel on her ring without a hint of sarcasm. David, however, shifted in his chair, restless under the weight of my composure. He kept sneaking glances at me, maybe searching for irritation, maybe waiting for me to slip. I gave him nothing. My disinterest was louder than anger. Then, as dessert was being served, Rachel leaned back in her chair with a smirk. "You must be relieved, Emily. Hosting isn't really your thing, is it?" The jab was subtle, but it carried the same dismissive tone I had heard from her for years. I set my fork down, folded my hands neatly, and met her eyes. My voice was calm, even pleasant. "Interesting you'd say that, Rachel. I still remember staying up all night helping you practice for that bank interview, the one that landed you your current job. Or the weekends I hosted when your mom wasn't feeling up to it. Or that time I covered the deposit on your first apartment because you didn't have it saved yet. Hosting, helping, supporting, those things seemed to matter back then." The table went silent. The only sound was the clink of a spoon against a porcelain dish. Rachel's face drained of color, her smirk vanishing. She glanced around, suddenly aware that everyone else had heard what she had so carefully kept quiet. David sat frozen beside me, guilt painted across his face. He hadn't told them. He had never shared the ways I'd stood behind his sister, the sacrifices I'd made in silence. Now the truth lay bare in front of all of them, undeniable. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't press the point. I simply leaned back, picked up my fork again, and smiled as though the matter was closed. The weight of what I had said hung heavy in the room, and I didn't need to add a single word more. The car ride home was heavy with silence. David gripped the steering wheel tighter than usual, his jaw working as if he were chewing words he didn't know how to release. When we stepped inside, he finally broke. "Emily," he said, his voice rough, "I messed up. I should have stood up for you. I should have told Rachel no. I don't know what I was thinking. Please just don't give up on us." Tears slipped down his cheeks, his shoulders shaking as he reached for my hands. For the first time since I'd known him, he wasn't confident, wasn't dismissive. He was undone. But where he expected pity, I felt only a clear, sharp calm. My heart didn't race. My throat didn't ache. The storm had passed inside me, and what remained was certainty. I pulled my hands back gently and looked at him. "You excluded me once," I said evenly. "I'm excluding you for the rest of my life." The words hung in the air, final and immovable. He tried to speak again, but I was already walking down the hall, past the framed photos of vacations and holidays that now felt like someone else's life. I gathered what mattered to me piece by piece and placed it into a suitcase. He followed, begging, promising change, but I didn't waver. Each step away from him felt like reclaiming ground I had surrendered long ago. By the time I reached the door, I knew there was no turning back. The betrayal had cut deep, but in leaving I discovered something stronger than revenge: freedom. He had taught me where I stood in his world, and now I chose to stand somewhere else entirely, on my own, with dignity intact. The door closed behind me, and with it, the weight of being unchosen fell away. My revenge wasn't in shouting or punishment. It was in the quiet power of building a life where his disregard no longer touched me. The hurt remained, yes, but the greater truth was this: the best answer to betrayal was living well without him.